Welcome to Office 2013 class video number 42. Hey, if you want to download this workbook, and this workbook's for videos 41 and 42, click on the link below the video or go to our class website. Hey, we're still studying Excel, and this is Excel Basics 24, and we want to talk about pivot tables. Now, earlier in the class, we already talked about pivot tables. We saw some simple examples. Here, we want to see the true power of pivot tables. Now, I want to go to a sheet way at the end here, so I'm going to right-click my scroll arrows and select key T1, click OK. So, here's our 5 steps that we looked at earlier for creating a pivot table. We want to remind ourselves of the 3 examples we did earlier in the class. Here's our data set. You got to have a proper data set for a pivot table. Field names at the top, records in rows, and empty cells all the way around the data set, or row headers or column headers. Now, this is raw data. We want to organize it and create useful information. Well, we could certainly do that with formulas, and we did this back in Excel Basics number 3. We made 3 pivot tables. We used the sum-ifs functions to add for each day. Then we created the sum-ifs functions to add for each region and also for each sales rep. Pivot table can do the same thing. But what is it that a pivot table does? It goes from raw data and it makes calculations based on conditions or criteria. In our first example on pivot table 1, we'll do calculations with one condition. Then we'll go over to PT2 and do calculations with one or more conditions or criteria. All right, so here's the steps. Click in a single cell. Go up to Insert, Tables Group, Pivot Table. Since we're going to be doing a lot of pivot tables, we're going to use the keyboard shortcut. I'm going to click Escape, single cell, Alt, you look for your N key. N, you look for your V key. Now I'm going to do this fast. One cell selected, Alt N V. Now this opens up the pivot table dialog box. It'll always guess right as long as you have a proper data set. We're going to put this on this existing sheet here. I'm going to click in Location and click in I-15, click OK. This is called the field list. Date, region, sales rep, sales. That's why you got to have a proper data set. This field list would have no idea what to do if it didn't have fields at the top of each column. Filter area, columns area, rows area, values. Now, we talked about this before. To make pivot tables easy on you, you visualize your table first. We have calculations in different rows. Our criteria, which is each individual date, sits at the head of each row header. So for us, our date field is going to be dropped into the row area. Same when we do this one. Region will be dropped into the row area. Down here, sales rep will be dropped into the row area. And for each one of these reports, we're going to take our sales column and drop that into our values area. Now, what just happened to my field list? Hey, if you're not clicked somewhere inside the pivot table, even when you haven't created it yet, your field list goes away. If it really goes away, even when you click back, then right-click and there'll be a hide. Or if you click hide, then you'll have to click Show Field List. All right, so here we go. We're going to use the drag and drop method. You can check, but text fields, date fields sometimes don't go where you want, so I like to use the drag method. I'm going to start with date. I'm going to click and drag date. And I'm going to drag the date field down to the row area. And it's only when I see that green horizontal bar or I see my little icon, the blue is in the row area, then I drop. And there we go. Instantly, the pivot table went through the whole date column and it got exactly one instance of each unique date. One amazing thing about pivot tables is when you drag and drop a field into the row or columns area, it will create a unique list listing each unique item one time. Now we want sales. That's our calculation. So we're going to drag it down to the values area. And when I see that horizontal green stripe, I drop it. That is quick and easy. Now let's create another pivot table. Alt-NV, location, existing worksheet. I'm going to click in cell I-23. Click OK. This time I want region, so I'm going to drag region down to rows, sales down to values. I'm going to create another pivot table. Alt-NV, existing location. Click in cell I-29, click OK. Sales rep down to rows area. Sales down to values. That is fast and easy. Now that's what we did in our video Excel Basics number 3 video. But we want to do a few extra things here. First off, we want some number formatting. You do not want to highlight cells and add number formatting with the Format Cells dialog box, Control 1. The reason why is Escape. That formats the cells. Later we will pivot our pivot table. Pivot tables can move. All of a sudden this sales field and this date field will be in a different location. If you format the actual cells, J16, J17, J18, then only those cells have formatting. We don't want that. We want to actually format the sales field. So that sales field, no matter where I drag it, I want it to have currency number formatting. So instead of format cells, we're going to right click and go down to value field settings. Value because that's where we're making a calculation in the value area. Field because it's a field from our data set. Settings because it's the properties or settings. Click, and here's our one-stop shopping. We can change the name, we can change the function, and we can add number formatting. We'll come back and change the name and the function later, but now we just want to do number formatting. There it is. It looks just like the Format Cells dialog box. I'm going to click Currency, Decimal 0, and click OK. Click OK. The other thing about this report is row labels is not a good label. We want date there. So we have to change this every single time we create a pivot table. The default setting, for whatever reason, Microsoft has row labels, and later when we do columns, it'll say column labels, and we don't want that. So we're going to, with a cell in the pivot table selected, design, layout, report layout, show in tabular form. And instantly we get our date. Now let's come down here, right click, value field settings, number, currency, no decimals, click OK, click OK. Design, layout, report layout, show in tabular. There it is, says region. So just like that, we've created our 3 pivot tables with 2 additional features. Number formatting from value field settings, and we changed every single time tabular form so we can see the field names. Now let's go over to PT2. We always want to try and visualize our report first. This is called a cross-tabulated table. Any intersecting cell is a calculation based on 2 criteria. This total from the sales column is based on the date column where we found 10/24/13 and the region column where we found Southwest. Only when it raced through the date and the region and found both 10/24 in the date column and Southwest in the region column, true, true, it met our 2 criteria, did it take the number and add it in this cell. All right, and so instead of doing some formula like sum ifs, by the way, formulas are great. They have their place. But if you just want to do a fast and easy cross-tabulated table, there's nothing faster than a pivot table. All right, we're going to click in one cell in our data set. Alt-NV, existing. I'm going to select K15, click OK. I'm going to try and use my horizontal scroll bar here. It's kind of hard to see. Let me see if I can drag this up in the corner. Yours is probably not up there. I'm going to try and drag this down a little bit, and then with my four-way arrow, click, and this is hard, kind of drag it right up into the corner. And there it is. That's hard to do. Now I'm going to use my horizontal scroll arrow there. I'm going to drag region to the column. Instantly I have my unique list of northwest, southwest, west. I drag date down to the rows. Instantly I have a unique list of dates. Now I drag sales down to the values, and the default calculation is adding. That is amazing. Immediately go up to design, report layout show in tabular. Right click, value field settings, number. And then whatever number formatting. I'm just choosing currency and 0 decimals. Click OK. Click OK. I also would like to see zeros instead of empty cells. Empty cells are fine, but I want to see zeros. Right click, and we want to go down to Pivot Table Options. Here on the layout and form for empty cell show, notice you can show error values too. Show them however you want. 0. Click OK. If you have accounting, it'll show up as a dash. That is amazing. That is so much easier than having to do it with the SUMIFs. Again, though, SUMIFs will have their place. We'll compare and contrast in just a moment. Let's see if we can create this table, but I'm going to go over to a different sheet, and we're going to learn why they call a pivot table a pivot table. Notice we have sales rep in the row area and region in the column area. Scroll over. I'm going to go to Pivot Table 3. Now, we're going to put this on a new sheet. Alt-NV. And because we're going to put it on a new sheet, and because we have a proper data set and we know that this is going to guess correctly, notice this is blue. If I hit Enter, that OK will be enacted, and this new pivot table will go on a new worksheet. Now, I'm going to do this fast. Click in a single cell, Alt-NV, Enter. And just like that, we have a new sheet. Here's our field list over here. We can click and drag. It's hard. It is. You have to really drag hard. Double click this sheet, and I'm going to call this Pivot 1. Enter. All right, so we're going to drag region to the column area, sales rep to the row area. It doesn't matter in which order you drag those. And then I'm going to drag sales to values. With the cell selected, design, report layout, tabular. Right click, value field settings. I'm going to go down to number, currency. Click OK, click OK. There's our report. That is amazing, quick and easy. But we want to see what pivot means. And pivot just means that it's easy to pivot this. Your boss comes in and it's not sales rep as row headers. That's supposed to be in the column. So watch this. I'm going to drag region down to the rows, and watch this. I'm going to pivot it. You could see that green line. And instantly I have region, and this, let's drag this down a little bit. You can see, oh, region and then sales rep. So it shows region, sales rep, region, sales rep. Not all the sales reps are listed here because not all the sales reps made sales in the Southwest. Now, if I want to drag sales rep, I can drag this one up to the columns, and instantly I have pivoted my pivot table. You can also filter drop downs. When you see a drop down, there's probably got sorting and filtering. So if I want to see just the West and the Northwest, I click OK. That's amazing. The pivot table also can be filtered. I'm going to click this in, select all, click OK. You can also change the function. I'm going to come in, right click, value field settings, the one-stop shopping. Now let's change it to average. Click OK. And just like that, average of sales, even the label up here has changed. That's amazing. Quite a powerful feature for data analysis. Now let's do some more pivoting. I'm going to uncheck everything. Boop, boop, boop. And now I want to take sales rep down to the row area, and watch this. I'm going to do something crazy. I'm going to take sales rep to the values area. You are allowed to take text fields down to the value area. It's not going to add them, but it will count them. That's how many transactions each sales rep had. Remember, if we look back at our data set, a transaction consists of individual sales. So Gigi, if her name is listed once here, that means she had one sale. Here, another sale. So when we come back to our pivot 1, over here we see sales rep and sales rep in the values. It means it's just counting. So how many sales did each one have? Chin and Gigi had 7. So you have quite a lot of power here. I'm going to uncheck both of those. Now I'm going to bring date down to rows. So this lists each unique date. Now I can list sales rep below date. And I can see for each day what's the total. So I'm going to drag sales. I am just pivoting. That's the power of the pivot table. Now I'm going to come and uncheck everything. And I'm going to leave sales rep down in the rows, region in the columns, sales in the values. I do want to show you a few shortcuts here. I showed you the value field settings because that really is the one-stop shopping. You can change the name, you can change the function, you can change the number formatting. In the next class after Business 216, Business 214, Highline Excel class, we see how to do all sorts of other calculations with show values as. This is the one-stop shopping. But let me show you a few things here. If we wanted to quickly change sum to average, right-click, Summarize Values By, and I can simply change it to average. I could also right-click and number formatting. Notice this doesn't say format cells, it's number formatting. And there's format cells for the field. So if I change this to currency and click OK, that's got the number formatting. Now if I pivot this, bring region down to rows, sales rep down up to columns, instantly everything's pivoted and our field remains formatted with currency number formatting. Now we want to go over and look at PT4. All right, on this sheet, this is the report we're trying to create. Sales reps as row headers. And then we need 1, 2, 3 separate calculations. I actually want to add, count, and average the numbers from the sales column. That's no problem for a pivot table. We'll drag the sales field 3 times to the values area in our pivot table user interface. All right, let's click in a single cell, Alt and V, existing. I'm going to place it in F29. Click OK. Now let's drag sales rep down to rows. There's our sales rep. Drag sales 1, 2, 3 times. We have 1, 2, 3 fields. Now before we do anything, let's go to Design, Report Layout, Show in Tabular. Now we're actually going to have to change each function and the number formatting for each one of these columns. For this one, right-click Number Formatting. And I'm going to change it to some dollar number formatting. We don't need to change the sum because it's already sum, but I do want to change the label. So I'm going to click in that cell with the label that's still part of the pivot table. I'm going to hit F2 and backspace to get rid of that text. That's another way to change the title for your calculation. Enter. All right, now this one. Right-click, Value Field Settings. And we want to look through this function list. Now look, there's a count. There's a count right there. But there's also, if we scroll down and look at all 11 functions, there's a count numbers. Now that is the one we want because we're counting numbers. Now, when they built the names of functions for pivot tables, all of these functions are the same as our regular Excel functions, except for count numbers and count. Count is exactly like count a. It counts not empty cells. And count numbers counts numbers. If you look on this sheet, there's an exact translation between functions you find in PivotTables and regular Excel spreadsheet. But really, the only difference is count numbers counts numbers, and count counts not empty cells. All right, so I'm going to select count numbers. I do not need to add any number formatting because I'm counting. I'm going to change the name up here just to count, and then click OK. So that counts how many transactions each sales rep has. Now let's change this one. Right click, value field settings, average, some number formatting, and I'm going to backspace. Let's change the column width. Click and drag. So just like that, we have created our report for sum, count, and average. Now, I want to show you, you can actually copy a pivot table, Control C, and paste it somewhere else, and it's a whole new pivot table that you can pivot and change. What I want to do is come over here, and in the values areas, I want to click the drop down and say remove field. Now, I can't come up here and uncheck that, but here I can say remove field, and so that one's removed. And now, instead of using sales, I'm going to drag sales rep down to the values. And watch this. By default, it says count of sales rep. If I right-click this, value field settings, you'll see that it defaults to count, which counts not empty cells, which is like our counta function in Excel, and that's what we use for text. So anytime you drag a text down to the values area, it will do a calculation. It just counts. So that actually probably would have been an easier way, because then all we have to do is come here, F2, and then backspace. It'll get you the same exact information. Either one is exactly fine to use. All right, now let's go look at PT5. We want to look at another amazing pivot table feature. Now actually, this PT5 and the next example, they're like the most amazing things about PivotTable. So here's the deal. Your boss comes in, gives you this data set, and says, quick, I need a monthly sales report. But here you're given daily transactions. How are you going to roll up all of the Aprils into one single number? PivotTable comes to the rescue. Click in a single cell. Alt-NV, enter to put it onto a new sheet. And the trick is date. We drag it to the row. That's a unique list of all the days. If we drag our sales to values, instantly we have our daily sales report. But we want monthly. So here's what you do. You come over to the date inside the pivot table, right click, and point to group. We're going to group by months. Click. The grouping dialog box comes up. I always like to click months and years, just in case there's some dates from a different year. I don't want to roll up all the Januaries from different years. Now I click OK, and can you believe it? A few clicks and I took that huge transactional data set and rolled it up into monthly sales report. Now let's go to Design, Report Layout, Tabular. Right click number formatting and some sort of dollar number formatting. That is just a thing of beauty. And if you don't want to see the year, just come over and check the year. That year was added when we group by years. Look at that. I actually kind of like the year like that. Oh, wait a second. Notice when I checked it, it threw it down there. That's why I don't like to check. I like to drag, and I'm going to drag it above date, not below. That's much better. All right, so grouping by month and year pretty much can't be beat. Let's go look at another example where we're going to group. Actually, before we do that, let's click in a cell to close the field list. Double click this. I'm going to call this Pivot 2, enter. And use my scroll arrows and drag my Pivot 2 on the other side of PT5. I clicked and dragged. Now let's go over to PT6. Now we want to talk about slicers and timelines. Let's first create a basic report, regional revenue. Now this data set is huge. Control down arrow. There's 10,000 records. Control home. Let's click in a single cell. Alt NV enter. Drag the field list over just a little bit closer. Region to rows and revenue to sales. Instantly 10,000 rows of data. We have a little report. Design, tabular. Right click, number, currency OK. Now we want to talk about this, the filter. If we drag product down to the filter, filter does just what it says. It filters the whole report. So check this out. I can click the drop down and come up and select just the Aspen boomerang. Click OK. Now each one of these calculations is adding with two conditions. Here we're adding all of the Aspen sales in the West. Here's all the Aspen in the Midwest. However, filter, as cool as that is, there's a better way to do it. I'm going to drag this filter up to the field list. And instead of using a filter, we're going to go to Analyze. And in the filter group, we can use Slicer. Now, Slicer is just a fancy looking filter. So I click Slicer, and I'm going to select Product. Click OK. All right, so we can have some fun with this filter. We can come up and change the color if we want. We can, up here in columns, click and say 2, enter. We can move the size of it. That is simply amazing. Now we can do some data analysis. Click on Carlota. Just like that, it's filtered on Carlota. Sunbell, these are all boomerang products. The V-Rang, the Quad, the awesome freestyle boomerang. So we can see in each region how our quad sales were. If you want to clear the filter or the slicer, just click that X. Now, how do I do this? Now, from earlier in the class, we of course know, and I can hear everyone screaming at the Control key. So I'm going to click on Majestic Butte, now hold Control and click on Bellin. Just like that, I can see the total in each region for just those two. If I wanted to highlight like this, and all the ones in between, hold Shift. So those selection keyboards show up everywhere. Clear, absolutely amazing. That's the slicer. Now let's come down here. I'm going to double click this and call this Pivot 3, enter. Now let's go back over, and I'm going to move this. I'm going to move this to the other side of PT6. Come back over to PT6. And now we want to talk about another filter called a timeline. Notice we have a date column, and we have multiple years. Click in a single cell, Alt NV, enter. We're going to start off our pivot table by dragging the date to the rows, revenue to values. There's our daily sales report. Report layout, tabular form. Right-click number. So there's our daily. Let's right-click and group by month. In this case, we definitely want year also. You can also tell up here the span of our dates. Click OK. That is amazing. 10,000 records. And we quickly have our monthly report for 2 years. But this is going to get much better. Let's slide this out of the way and go up to Analyze and insert a timeline. Date. It's always going to be a date. It's a timeline. And watch this. Right now we have months selected. If I scroll over here and click on January or February, I see just those. I can click and slide the timeline. Look at that. I want to include January. I just boop. That is so amazing. The timeline allows you to go from months to years. Now I can see part of 2013, all of 2013, all of 2014. How about quarters? I can click and drag. Show just the first 2 quarters. click on Q1 in 2014 and I see just that. Slide it. You can also do days. Now ours, if we come over all the way over to the beginning and select May 3rd, that's just one day. Now we have it set up grouped as months. If we had it set up as days, then this would work better. But no problem, it'll still work right here. There's exactly May 9th. It just doesn't have a good label. All right, I'm going to go back to months. Look at that, it even shows partial month. So, timeline as a filter, and there's some color up here. If you didn't notice, you can add some color. All right, double click Pivot 4, enter, and I'm going to drag on the other side of Pivot 3. Now we actually have one more topic. We want to go over to the sheet PT7, and we just want to talk about the difference between a formulas like SUMIFs and a pivot table, because we can see they're calculating the same answers. When we print out the report, we could do the formatting so they're the same. So what's the difference? Here's the main difference. If you change the source data, so this transaction I'm going to change to 5,000 for Northwest. When I hit enter, formulas instantly update. Pivot tables do not. So watch. Enter. Instantly. SUMIFs updates. Pivot table does not. Now it's no big deal. All you have to do is refresh the pivot table. Analyze. Refresh. Refresh all is when you have multiple pivot tables. There's even a keyboard shortcut, Alt F5. You can also right-click refresh. So when I refresh, Alt F5, instantly this updates. So when source data changes, you have an extra step for pivot tables that you don't have with formulas. Sometimes people want their formulas to update instantly, especially if the data changes a lot. The other thing to think about formulas and pivot tables, remember in the pivot table there was only 11 functions. Well, there's like 450 functions. So pivot tables just can't do as many things as formulas can do in terms of calculating. All right, that's a lot about pivot tables. Absolutely the most amazing, powerful data analysis feature in Excel. All right, we'll see you next video.